Welcome to Trauma Demystified, podcast brought to you by Bright Horizon Therapies. I am Natalie Jovanich, a trauma counselor and trauma coach, and I'm glad you're listening in today. Before I jump into today's episode, When the Past Shows Up, Understanding Childhood Trauma Triggers, I want to apologize to take so long to launch this episode. I have been busy updating my website and writing more blog posts. So if you're interested in diving deep into trauma recovery on healing as an adult with childhood trauma, head over to my page and check out the latest blog posts. Childhood trauma triggers. What are they? The first person I dated was a painful experience. I liked them. It felt beautiful. Until the first conflict showed up. I suddenly felt that overwhelming feeling like I was dying if I stayed any second longer in that relationship. I broke up with them without ever trying to explore the conflict. The part with fear of abandonment had taken over. Just at that stage, I wasn't aware of it. I didn't even know that I had experienced childhood trauma. My system was focused on surviving. Looking back now, I can see that my part with the fear of abandonment was trying to protect me from the pain I'd felt as a child. But it also meant I couldn't stay and learn if the conflict was dangerous or just something two people can learn to work through constructively. Have you ever had a moment where your reaction felt way bigger than the situation? Then this episode may be what you need right now. So here's what I want you to know. Triggers, or as I call them activated parts, are a natural part of healing trauma. They're not something that shouldn't be happening. They are expected, and they make sense if we look at them more closely. So today we are going to explore what childhood trauma triggers actually are and how they connect to memories stored in your body, why I prefer saying activated parts instead of triggered, and how that shift in language can change everything. Something significant, how these parts carry both past pain and present truth at the same time. What activation actually looks like in your daily life, because it shows up in so many different ways. And the critical difference between being activated, experience re-traumatization, and just having normal human emotions. As always, take what resonates and leave the rest. You're the expert in your life. So let's dive into the content. Now, triggers can show up with any kind of trauma, but today I'm speaking specifically to those of you who are healing from childhood trauma as adults. Because there's something unique about what happens when we are hurt as children and how it may show up in adults. So when we go through something painful but not traumatic, here's what's supposed to happen. We process and digest the experience over time. For example, when my cat died, I grieved his loss. Initially, the emotions were more intense, but they became softer over time. I spoke about him, I cried, I worked through regrets until at one stage I could remember him and felt joy again. This is a natural way we process challenging emotions and situations. But when trauma happens, this natural process gets interrupted. The experience is too overwhelming to handle in the moment, so we do what we can to survive. We go into survival mode, activating our rational thinking parts and put those big emotions behind a wall because we simply don't have the capacity to process them yet. And here's the thing about childhood. As children, we are still building what we call our window of tolerance, our capacity to feel and manage big emotions. We haven't developed it yet. And if our caregivers don't have the capacity either, there's no model, no framework for working through these experiences. So let me be clear, not every difficult thing that happened in childhood is traumatic, but some things are. And those unprocessed emotions behind the wall, they're still there, stuck in your body, waiting. They want to be digested. They're just waiting to say, hey, here I am. They come out with all of the intensity when the initial trauma happens, and once again overwhelm our capacity to cope with them because we aren't prepared for them. When something in your present life resembles an aspect of that past experience, maybe it's a tone of voice, a feeling of being dismissed, or a sense of being trapped, those emotions behind the wall get activated. They jump out from behind the wall, and suddenly, what should feel like maybe a 3 out of 10 in a situation right now, suddenly it feels like a 10 or a 9. Now, triggers are often easier to identify when we have explicit memories, clear conscious memories of what happened. It makes more sense when you can connect the emotional intensity to the specific event you remember. For example, it was easier for me to navigate flashbacks about the sexual abuse I experienced as a child than the wound of abandonment. Because with the abuse, I had explicit memories. I could say, oh, this is why I feel this way. But with the abandonment, I had implicit memories. And implicit memories are tricky. They are stored as body sensations and emotions, but they are disconnected from the actual event. You feel the terror, the panic, the grief, but you can't point to a clear memory that explains it. The more you grew up in a traumatic environment, meaning one of your caregivers was either frightening or frightened themselves, or you experience ongoing emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, the more likely you are to be working with implicit memories. Also, if these traumatic experiences happened while you were in the womb or when you were an infant, it's unlikely that you can consciously remember it, but your body does. And that can feel crazy making. You're having this huge reaction and can't figure out why, because the story you know about your life doesn't seem to match your feelings. So that's what childhood trauma triggers are. They are those unprocessed emotions from the past stuck in your body, jumping out when something in the present reminds your system of what happened before. Sometimes you can connect the dots clearly. Sometimes it just feels confusing and overwhelming. Either way, it's your system trying to finally process what it couldn't handle back then. While triggers are uncomfortable, they are parts of you asking for attention and healing. You might have noticed that I keep saying activated parts instead of triggered. That's intentional. Here's why I don't love the term triggered. The word triggered has become loaded. It's often used to dismiss people, to imply they are being too sensitive or overreacting. I've seen it weaponized in relationships. You're just triggered becomes a way to avoid accountability for genuinely harmful behavior. But there are other reasons why I prefer activated parts, and they have to do with how we understand healing itself. The term parts come from the understanding that all human beings have parts, activated parts, and a you that was undamaged. I think that aspect is too often overlooked in counseling models that only focus on symptoms, because an essential element of healing is that you work towards reconnecting with the you that wasn't damaged. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly felt completely like yourself? Maybe in nature, maybe with someone you trust, or maybe doing something creative. That sense of, oh, this is actually me. That's your healthy core. Some call it self-energy. I think of it as a magical inner child, the part that is naturally curious, playful, and full of wonder. Find a label that resonates with you. I like to use essence. Your essence did not get destroyed by trauma. You may feel disconnected from it, but it's still there. Your part builds walls around it, took on the pain and stayed vigilant, or to keep that essence of you safe. When we are talking about a part of me is activated, we are acknowledging there is a you, that essence, magical core, who can witness what's happening, who can relate to the activated part with gentleness, and who can eventually help it heal. But more than that, activated part gives you something different. It creates a little bit of separation between you and the response. Instead of I am triggered, which can feel like your whole identity at the moment, you can say a part of me is activated. Do you feel the difference? One blames you for a reaction while disrespecting the past painful experiences that caused it. The other acknowledges that this part is part of a larger system, which means you can build some agency. Over time, you have more capacity to stay in your adult self while activated parts show up. Healing isn't about getting rid of them. It's about supporting them and changing their behaviors if necessary and working through their wounds. Parts can change with persistence and patience, and they hold wisdom about who you are and what matters to you. And here's what the separation makes possible. You can create a relationship with that part of you. You can get curious about it. You can learn about what it's trying to protect you from. You can even negotiate with it about healthier ways to keep you safe. You can explore how you can set boundaries so that the part feels more protected. The word part also does something else. It holds a beautiful balance. It keeps you accountable as the adult who's responsible for your healing and your behavior. But it also invites curiosity and gentleness towards what's happening inside of you. Because these parts, they are not the enemy. They helped you survive extreme situations that were genuinely overwhelming. They developed unhealthy coping skills sometimes, yes, but that made sense given what you were facing. Healing is a process. It takes time. Some of your parts are known to us immediately and others may take a while to discover. And speaking about parts reminds us that those responses want to protect you from further pain or hurt. So befriending them rather than fighting them is the way forward to heal the wound underneath. And if you want to explore this approach further, I have a complete episode dedicated to the benefits of parts work for healing trauma, and I link it in the show notes. So we have talked about childhood trauma triggers and why I call them activated parts. Now let's talk about something that makes it a little bit more complicated and honestly more important to understand. Here's what often gets missed in trauma work. When a part gets activated, we taught to ask ourselves, is this about the past or the present? But that's the wrong question, because the answer is usually both. Your activated parts carry old pain from childhood and are often responses to something real happening right now. Both truths exist simultaneously, which is crucial to understand because dismissing either can keep you stuck. Let me tell you about a time when understanding this would have saved me a lot of confusion and pain. This was about 20 years ago. I used to have a part that would resort to self-injury during conflicts with my ex-partner. Not every conflict, but at the end of our relationship where our dynamic was unhealthy. And yes, this part carried deep wounds from childhood trauma, where conflict might have led to physical violence. But here's what's also true. My ex-partner ignored my boundaries. I said stop several times and he ignored me. At that stage, I wasn't aware that I could have just walked away out of the room. The more he yelled at me, the more I dissociated. Self-injury helped me back into my body. He would call me crazy when this part showed up. And I'd be left wondering, am I overreacting because of my trauma? At that stage, I had so much internalized stigma that I didn't dare to ask, or is his behavior actually also harmful? I couldn't even let myself consider that his behavior might be part of the problem. I was so convinced that my trauma made me the problem. The answer was both. My part was activated, absolutely. The intensity came from old wounds. I also wasn't aware enough about how to set healthy boundaries. But he was also genuinely crossing boundaries and being dismissive. Both were true. Now, was it my responsibility to work with that part and find healthier coping strategies? Yes, absolutely. The part with self-injury, while an adaptive coping skill, was something I needed to address so that I could find healthier ways to handle conflict. In my experience, a part stopped appearing when I could respect my boundaries and the more I healed. But was it also not okay for him to call me names and ignore my boundaries? Also yes. His behavior was genuinely harmful regardless of my trauma history. And here's the problem. He used "you're just triggered" as a way to avoid taking responsibility for his behavior. My activation became an excuse for him to dismiss everything I was saying about what wasn't working in the relationship. There was never a space to debrief what happened, to explore what each of us was responsible for, and also to figure out how to create more safety and how to create more responsibility. My trauma just became the reason nothing was ever his fault. Another example is when you have two partners, one with an anxious attachment style and the other one with an avoidant one. I see this dynamic play out all the time in my work. So here's what typically happens. The anxious partner's fear of abandonment part gets activated when the avoidant partner pulls away or needs space. The part from childhood is screaming, "Don't leave me. I'm not safe alone." And yes, that's an old wound. But there's the thing. The avoidant partner is actually withdrawing. That's real. It's happening in the present. So the anxious partner isn't just triggered. They are responding to an actual pattern of emotional unavailability happening right now. Now flip it. The avoidant partner often has a part that learned closeness is suffocating or I need my freedom in childhood. When the anxious partner seeks connection, that part gets activated and they withdraw even more to protect themselves. So the anxious partner is actually pursuing, maybe even demanding reassuring, that's real too. So who's just triggered? Both of them and neither of them. Because both have old wounds getting activated and both are responding to something real the other person is doing right now. In a healthy relationship, both partners recognize that dance. The anxious partner works on self-soothing and not making the partner responsible for all their security, and the avoidant partner works on staying present, even when uncomfortable, and communicating instead of disappearing. This way, we can work towards connecting from our adult self, not just our wounded parts. Both do their healing work, take responsibility for their patterns, and acknowledge that the other person's experience is real and not just in their head. This pattern can be more challenging to address in dating relationship because it can be a very real that one partner is interested in dating and may cut ties more easily. And usually in this dating phase, you don't have the psychological safety and the level of commitment to really address this. Therefore, learning to take care of your parts can be a vital step to date as healthy as possible. The reality is that our adult relationships show us all the areas where we have the potential to grow and heal. When activated parts show up in our relationships, there's often a kernel of truth in the present moment, a cross boundary, an unmet need, a toxic pattern. Your part might add intensity from the past, but this doesn't mean that there's nothing actually wrong right now. While it often isn't the worst-case scenario your parts may fear, it usually does indicate that something needs your attention. And here's something else to consider. Research suggests that about 80 to 95% of people grew up in dysfunctional homes, which means it's likely that both partners in a relationship have some trauma or pain, some activated parts, some growth potential, and they are likely to show up under stress and in conflict. If your partner is lucky enough not to carry significant past trauma, that doesn't give them the right to look down on you or dismiss your experience. And it definitely doesn't mean that every reaction you have is just your trauma. In healthy relationship, both people approach this with humility and curiosity. Both are willing to look at their patterns. Both find creative ways to work through these challenges together. So here's what I want you to hold. Healing is a choice. Taking responsibility for your healing is a choice. And I want to be honest with you. It's also the only path to truly choosing yourself, honoring yourself, respecting yourself, and become the best version of yourself. You are responsible for your healing, your feelings, and your behaviors. You're responsible for working with your parts to find healthier coping strategies and for doing your own trauma recovery work. Now, a good trauma-focused counselor or trauma coach can offer you a safer space to do this work. They can guide you, support you, and witness you. But the only person who can actually work through it is you. No one can heal your wounds for you. No one can do that hard work of turning towards your parts and sitting with discomfort and of changing patterns. That's yours. I recognize that not everyone is in position to make that choice right now. Maybe you're in survival mode, maybe you don't have access to the financial resources you need, and that's real. I'm not dismissing those barriers. But I also don't want to pretend that healing will happen without actively choosing it. Waiting for the perfect circumstances, waiting to feel ready, waiting for someone else to fix it, that keeps you stuck. At the same time, if you want to feel truly alive, if you want to respect yourself and live with integrity, you have to choose to engage with your own healing. But you are not responsible for other people's harmful behaviors or their emotions. Not their boundary violations, not their contempt, not their emotional unavailability, not their refusal to do their own work. Learning to hold both truths is the work. My abandoned part is activated because of my past, and the person is actually being dismissive right now. Both can be true and both matter. Your activation doesn't excuse harmful behavior on your part. However, other people also have the responsibility for their own behavior, and dismissing what you experience as just being triggered isn't healthy. This framework can be hard, when the behavior of our parts triggers shame within us or faces social stigma. In general, angry parts are judged more harshly than fawn parts. Someone who gets loud in conflict faces more judgments than someone who people pleases. But healthy healing means seeing the behavior in the context of what has happened to you by still promoting accountability. Your anger part makes sense given what you survived, and you're still responsible for how you express it now. So what if systemic trauma shows up? Let me give you an example from my own life. When I experienced systemic trauma as an adult due to being a non-binary immigrant, I recognized new activated parts showing up and felt powerless. This situation wasn't something I could leave or avoid. I had to find a way to live with it in the most empowered way, and I had no clue how. Over time, I remembered that I had healed from childhood abuse once. I had the resources I'd built, the tools I'd learned, the capacity I'd developed. This awareness helped me recognize that I knew what healing was, and it gave me the trust that I could heal again, even when a part of me felt devastated. Remembering the healing journey I'd already experienced gave me the courage to start again, to choose again, healing, self-respect, and integrity by not allowing society to define me. And that's what I mean by choice. I didn't choose systemic violence. I couldn't choose to make it go away, but I could choose how I relate to it. I could choose to work with the parts that got activated. I could choose to give me the validation that society wasn't giving me. And I could choose parts work rather than collapse into powerlessness. That's what taking responsibility looks like. Not blaming yourself for what happened, but choosing to engage with your healing despite it. This doesn't mean that your experience of oppression is your responsibility or that you should minimize it. It means you're choosing your best life despite what society throws at you. Systemic oppression is wrong. In a healthy world, it wouldn't exist. And it's part of many people's lives every day. Why some people work toward changing system, why sometimes may feel like oppression is getting worse, we also get to choose how we survive and heal within them. So yes, do your healing work, absolutely. Work with your parts, build relationship with them, and help them find healthier ways to protect you. But also trust yourself. When parts show up, they might be trying to tell you something about what's happening right now, not just what happened back then. Don't dismiss your own experience just because you have trauma. Both are true, and holding both truths, that's where real healing happens. Now let's look about what activated parts actually look like. They show up in so many different ways, and recognizing them is the first step to working with them. Activated parts exist on a spectrum. What activation looks like for you depends on what happened to you, which parts develop to protect you, and what context you're in. Different parts often show up in different situations. One part might get activated when you're ending a relationship, another part when you're setting boundaries, and another one in conflict. I'm going to give you some examples, but I also invite you to get curious about your own experience. How do you know when a part is activated? Often it's when your response feels more extreme than you would have expected, or you find yourself behaving in ways that don't feel like your natural state of being, and you can't quite figure out why. Activated parts can show up as strong, intense emotions, anger that feels overwhelming, fear that feels like panic, shame that feels really crushing, or grief that comes out of the nowhere. The intensity is the clue. It's bigger than the situation seems to call for. Activated parts often trigger what we call trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Flight might involve being argumentative or aggressive, even if you don't want to be. Flight might look like desperately wanting to escape, to leave the room, or end a conversation. Freeze might look like shutting down completely, feeling immobilized, going blank, or dissociating. Like being not fully present in your body. Fawn might look like people-pleasing, over-apologizing, or losing yourself trying to keep the peace. And I want to be clear, these responses don't mean you're broken. They mean your nervous system is trying to protect you the way it learned to protect you back then. There is a difference in intensity though. When you're in a full trauma response, especially in fight or freeze, your prefrontal cortex isn't working the same way as it normally does. You literally don't have access to your whole thinking, reasoning brain. That's why it's often more helpful to explore what happened before the part got activated and work on prevention rather than trying to change your behavior while the part is already activated. It's hard to negotiate with a part already in full protection mode. So I'd invite you to explore the situation and also note which part showed up prior to the fight part showing up, and explore how you could take care of them and try to de-escalate earlier. You can also recognize activated part through body sensations, like your heart racing, chest tightening, difficulty breathing, nausea, tension, or feeling suddenly hot or cold. Your body often knows a part is activated before your mind catches up. Activated parts can also show up as intense inner voices, the voice of self-hatred, self-blame, harsh criticism. The parts are often trying to keep you safe by keeping you small or punishing you because they want to be in control, since trauma usually leaves us completely out of control. The learning here is to explore what is within your control and learning to be more comfortable with uncertainty. And here's something people often miss. Activated parts can look helpful on the surface. The part that has boundless compassion for others but burns you out by neglecting your boundaries. A caregiving part that puts everybody else first. The part that makes excuses for other people's harmful behavior. These parts feel useful and even virtuous, but they're still protective strategies that developed because it wasn't safe to have needs or taking up space. The more you heal, the more you can find balance, like compassion for others by respecting your boundaries and needs. Some activated parts use urgent coping strategies like self-injury, addictive behavior, suicidal thoughts. These parts are often trying desperately to manage pain that felt unbearable. They need curiosity, not judgment. And then there are parts that try to avoid pain at all costs, which may sound helpful but isn't healthy on the long run, because unprocessed trauma stays stuck in your body. Avoidance keeps the wound from healing. Overall, activated parts feel intense. They can feel confusing and overwhelming, like they are taking over. That's especially true if they haven't been listened to in years. If they haven't been ignored, suppressed, or shamed. They get louder when they are desperate for your attention. But here's what I want you to know. This doesn't mean you're broken or that you can't heal. It means your system is trying to protect you, and these parts need you to fully turn towards them with curiosity instead of judgment. So I want to invite you to take a first step. Reflect on this if it resonates with you and you feel safe enough. When you have noticed an activated part showing up, and let's start not with the most intense one, but a part with mild activation. What was the context? What were the cue of danger, real or perceived? And what might the part have needed from you that it wasn't getting? Just notice, just get curious. That's where healing begins. And if you want to learn more skills for managing activated parts, I have 2 episodes that dive deeper into that. One is on 5 trauma counseling techniques that really help, and one is dedicated to parts work. I leave the link in the show notes. If you're interested in a worksheet to get started with parts work, please send an email to nat@brighthorizontherapies.com. Now let's talk about emotions, activated parts, re-traumatization, and new trauma. I've heard a lot of misconceptions about these terms, and some of these misconceptions create unnecessary fear. So let's clarify what's what. First, emotion. Emotions are a natural part of being human. They are messengers about our needs and boundaries, even though it sometimes feels like the counseling field pathologizes them. We experience some emotions as pleasant, like joy, excitement, and love. Others are harder, like anger, sadness, and fear. And those emotions are often socially judged as negative or too much. But here's the truth. We have to be able to feel the full range of emotions if you want to feel happier and more alive. An emotion like sadness or fear often expresses an unmet need. Not everything difficult is trauma. Sometimes you're just angry, sad, or disappointed, and that's okay, that's human. Even if you are healed from the past, you still continue to have emotions. So for example, in a recent blog post, I mentioned that I felt annoyed while watching a late-night show about the Epstein files, because I didn't find it respectful towards survivors. So I stopped watching it. I wasn't triggered. I didn't have a trauma response. I just had a present moment emotion, annoyance, and I honored it by making a choice. That's healthy emotional processing. You can find the blog post on my website. An activated part is different. It's an emotion with additional intensity due to past trauma, or it is a trauma response getting triggered. Both are adaptive coping mechanisms that developed in response to extreme life experiences. Activated parts are to be expected when you're healing childhood trauma in adulthood. They don't mean you're doing something wrong. They don't mean healing isn't working. They are part of the process. And the good news is we can learn to manage them and we can heal them over time. Now, if the activation gets too intense and you're going into a full trauma response, grounding exercises can be really helpful. I have a podcast episode dedicated to grounding techniques. I link it in the show notes. Here's the key thing to understand about activated parts. They're connected to old wounds, and that comes with a double-edged sword. If we constantly avoid activated parts, we can't heal. The wound stays unprocessed. But if we jump into the situations that activate us too intensely, we can become dysregulated and overwhelmed. So healing isn't about avoiding activation, it's about finding the appropriate balance. Please note that healing doesn't mean you will never have a trauma response again. Trauma responses are part of life and a way to protect us from danger. It means that you can return to a state of safety and connection when the dangerous situation is over. And this is a flow that often gets interrupted due to past trauma. The key is balance. Challenge versus overwhelm. Let me give you an example. Trigger warnings about certain contexts, like story about abuse, violence, and trauma, can be useful for people who have very strong activations. They allow you to make an informed choice about what's best for you in that moment. And here's another layer. Reading a story from other survivors can actually help us process unprocessed emotions from our own trauma. It can be part of healing. So we need to find the right balance, challenging ourselves enough to improve our capacity to be with uncomfortable emotions without going into a full trauma response. The goal of healing is not to avoid everything that's uncomfortable. It's to increase your capacity to be with the discomfort without losing your sense of safety and groundedness. Now, re-traumatization is different. Re-traumatization happens if a present-day situation significantly echoes the original trauma in ways that overwhelms your capacity to cope. It can feel like the trauma is happening all over again, not just an emotional echo, but it's fully reliving it. It usually occurs when there is not enough safety or support in place. In my professional experience, re-traumatization is relatively rare. But when it does happen, it can feel profoundly destabilizing. If you notice situations that feel too similar to your original trauma and you're not yet ready to face them, it's okay to step back. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to seek support. And here's something important. The risk of re-traumatization reduces the more you heal the original unprocessed trauma. As you work through the old wounds, you build more capacity to handle difficult situations without being completely overwhelmed. If you're working with a trauma coach or a trauma-focused counselor and you notice your symptoms are getting worse rather than gradually improving, that's important information to discuss with them. If you feel like you're at risk of re-traumatization, I'd invite you to reach out to a mental health professional who specializes in trauma. Let me also be clear about what re-traumatization is not. Watching a documentary about trauma, even about trauma similar to yours, is not re-traumatization. Reading news stories, listening to podcasts, hearing other survivors' stories, this might be activating, but they are not re-traumatizing. Why? Because you have a choice. You can turn it off, you can walk away, you can take breaks. You're not experiencing the actual trauma. You're consuming content about trauma. That's a huge difference. Now, might watching something difficult activate parts? Absolutely. Might it bring up painful emotions? Of course. Might you choose to not engage with certain content because it doesn't feel helpful or seems disrespectful? That's totally valid. That's what I did with the Epstein show. However, having an activated part or choosing not To consume certain content is not the same as being re-traumatized. You still have agency. You're still safe enough in that present moment. You can make informed choices about who you engage with. If you start feeling overwhelmed by content, choose to take breaks. But if you notice you can't stop looking at it, even if you know it's not good for you, it might be a part that is hyper-focused on the past trauma and that this part has taken over. That's a good time to reach out to professional support. Finally, new trauma. New trauma happens when you experience something in the present that overwhelms your capacity to process it emotionally. It's a genuine traumatic event happening now, not an echo of the past. And I want to be really clear about something. If you have experienced sexual abuse as a child and then experienced sexual assault as an adult, that's not re-traumatization. That's new trauma. That is a new violation happening in the present. I need to address this because there is a problematic narrative in the trauma field. This idea that once you have experienced trauma, everything difficult afterwards is re-traumatization. That is not true, and the narrative is actually harmful and oversimplifying really complex dynamics. Here's what's real. If you have experienced abuse as a child and someone abuses you as an adult, that is a new person making the choice to harm you. They are responsible for that harm. Your trauma history doesn't make it re-traumatization. It makes it a second trauma if it overwhelms your capacity to integrate it emotionally. Yes, trauma history can make you more vulnerable to future harm. Maybe you learned that love looks like control, or you have trouble recognizing red flags, or certain patterns get normalized that shouldn't be. That's real. But that doesn't mean that new harm is somehow just an echo of the old harm. It is a new violation. Re-traumatization is often about healing processes or therapeutic approaches that overwhelm you, not about life continuing to be hard or people continue to target you with harmful behaviors. This distinction matters because calling everything re-traumatization takes responsibility away from people who cause harm in the present and puts it all on your unhealed past, and that is not fair to you. And here's the hard truth. Trauma is part of life. We can't prevent all difficult things from happening. Healing childhood trauma does increase your window of tolerance. It does expand your emotional capacity to handle complex situations, and it doesn't make you invincible. There's still a risk that new trauma can happen. The difference is you now have a wider window of tolerance and more tools, and you're better equipped to the process, and you don't need to start from the scratch. So if you have a suspicion that you might have experienced new trauma, it can be useful to reach out to a trauma coach or trauma-focused counselor. So here's what I want you to take away from that. Not every complex emotion is an activated part. Sometimes you just feel something in the present, and that's healthy. You live in your body. Part of healing is learning to sort this out. Not every activated part means re-traumatization. Most of the time, your system says, hey, this reminds me of something painful and I need your attention. And healing doesn't mean you will never feel activated again. It means you'll have more capacity to work with those parts, more tools to manage the intensity, and more ability to take the difference between past and present. You're not broken. You're not doing it wrong if parts still get activated. You are a human being with a nervous system that learned to protect you. And you're learning new ways to feel safer. So let's bring it all together. Activated parts aren't something to be ashamed of or to fight against. They are your system's way of saying something here needs attention, either from the past that's still unhealed or something in the present that isn't okay, or both. Healing isn't about never getting activated again. It's about building the capacity to recognize what's happening, to hold both, past and present, with compassion, and to trust yourself while doing your work. You're not too much. You're not broken. You're a human being with a nervous system that learned to protect you. And you're learning new, healthier ways to feel safe. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love it if you share it with someone else who might benefit from it. Sometimes just knowing we are not alone in this, that someone else gets it, can make the whole difference. You can find all the resources I mentioned today in the show notes, including the links, episodes on parts work, grounding techniques, and trauma counseling tools. And if you want to dive deeper, head over to my website at brighthorizontherapies.com for blog posts, resources on healing childhood trauma as an adult. Thank you for listening, for doing the work, and for trusting me with your time today. I'll see you in the next episode.